Really wanted to do three things with you this morning. The first is to step back for a moment and talk a little bit about the Nintendo strategy. What are we doing? Put it in context so that it's understandable, it's clear. And this is going to touch on both from a DS perspective as well as from a Revolution perspective. Second is talk about our key initiatives for the balance of this year going into the holidays as well as first quarter next year. And then thirdly, as Beth said, take some questions. So let's start. As we talk about the Nintendo strategy, I think a lot of you know a bit about my background, classical marketing training. I still know my way around a business section of my local Barnes & Noble. To help frame for you what we're doing from a strategic standpoint, let me spend a little bit of time talking about two current business thoughts out there in the marketplace and how it corresponds to what we're doing from a Nintendo perspective. The first is the concept of blue ocean strategies. I don't know how many of you might have taken a look at this book. I've read it. I'm a big fan of the thinking. And really what it talks about is how, from a company perspective, you ought to focus on expanding your market boundaries versus singularly being focused on your competition. The thought being, if all you do is focus on your competition, imagine it's like sharks in the water, you're dealing with blood in the water, you're constantly going at each other. Take a wider view. Look at broader opportunities out there in the marketplace. What's important about that is if you do it successfully, you're able to create new demand that never existed in that way before. Part of this is thinking about what can be versus what is. Thinking about broader horizons, broader opportunities. The second book is called The Innovators Dilemma. And I actually had the opportunity to meet the author of this book. The thinking is similar, slightly different bent. What this focuses on is the concept of disruptive technologies. And there's a lot of examples in history that touch on this. The thought being, if you are a market leader, you focus on doing what you're currently doing a little bit better. And then out of nowhere, someone comes with a disruptive technology and impacts your marketplace. Great example, happens to do with one of our competitors. But you look how Sony was so focused on creating a better Discman, a better disc-playing portable device. MP3 players came out of nowhere, impacted their marketplace, and then from there, Apple came in with iPod and iTunes, disrupted it even more. What this talks about is creating new definitions of performance, new definition of what the consumer wants, and delivering on that in new and provocative ways. These disruptive technologies typically appeal to new customers, people who are entering the category for the first time, but done successfully, really blow open a marketplace and bring all types of consumers, new, existing, into the marketplace. Typically, simpler, more straightforward applications versus, again, the market leaders focusing on, I'm simply going to do more of the same that has led me to a successful marketplace. Stop here for a moment, step back for a moment. What I'm not trying to frame is that, we as a company go manage our business based on what the current popular business thinking is. But I wanted to bring these two up because there's a lot of examples in the marketplace of successful companies that have applied these approaches to win in the marketplace. Touched on Apple, Dell Computer, Southwest Airlines. Southwest is a really interesting example. They didn't see themselves in competition with other airlines. They said, I want to be a better system and beat out buses and cars. So I drove all my costs down, low price. What did they do? They truly disrupted the airline industry. Now, let's start talking about Nintendo. Mr. Iwata has been focusing on these key thoughts truly for about the last 3 years. And these are excerpts from a variety of his speeches, whether it's at Tokyo Game Show from a couple years ago, GDC, our own E3 events, that are all focused on creating disruptive technologies and approaching the market in a different way to bring new news and innovation to the consumer, right? We can't simply expand the market. If that's all we try and do, slowly this industry will die. It's our responsibility to make games for all skill levels. Technology alone can't advance the business. That revolution doesn't follow the conventional path of game systems. That's what we're about. Disruptive technologies, new ways to think about the marketplace, driving the industry forward. There's a lot of examples that I can speak to in terms of how we're bringing this into practice today. But certainly, we ought to step back for a moment and understand why we're doing this. I think many of you have seen this data. This is the Japanese marketplace in the gaming industry. Certainly not a pretty picture. Strong downward trend. They've had this for a number of years. Interesting little tidbit. This year, for the first time, software sales are actually going to be up in Japan. Why? Nintendo's, brain training, a lot of the key games and key innovations that we've brought to the marketplace behind DS. Okay? You're all saying, but that's Japan, that's over there, it's not here. A couple things to think about. This is TRIS data, current marketplace. Last 2003, 2004, decline years. This year, it'll probably be up on a year-over-year basis. It's taken two existing launches in the handheld space, right? DS and PSP, plus Xbox 360 to drive growth on a year-over-year basis. 3 new systems in the marketplace in order to achieve that. Well, Reggie, come on, still isn't really a good example. You tell me. Was September a fluke? Down 24% software sales year over year? The entire third quarter down 6% year over year? Is it a fluke? You tell me. Let's look at the install base last 4 generations. First thing to note, as recently as about a year ago, projections were being made that the current generation would reach 60 million household penetration. Ain't gonna happen. Ain't gonna happen. Another couple tidbits. So this chart is pure number of units sold. Doesn't take into account duplicated ownership. Doesn't take into account population growth. You overlay those 2 facts onto this chart to get a percent population, if you will, with a console in the household. That's what it looks like. That's what it looks like. In the 8-bit years, 31% of households had a gaming system in the home. This year, where is it going to end up, or in the current generation, excuse me? Somewhere 32, 33%. The growth we've seen has been driven by population growth, and it's been driven by duplicated ownership of systems. I'm about to heap a little bit more bad news. Let's talk about people who are playing games. This is a study from Piper Jaffray. They've been doing this for the last 3 half-yearly installments that looks at, among teens, who's increasing their gameplay, who's decreasing their gameplay. Just a rough measure. The red or the orange are the percent of teens who are saying that they're decreased the amount of time they're spending playing games. It's gone up fairly consistently every time they've run the study. And the amount of teens saying that they're increasing their amount of gameplay. Last 2 half years have been stagnant, down fairly substantially from fall of 2004. A couple other tidbits. This is our core audience, if you will, in terms of that pipeline of young boys who are coming into the U.S. population. And as you can see, 2004, there are less male 10 to 14-year-olds in that cohort. A little bit more bad news. The group that feeds into this, the 8 to 10-year-olds, are down another 8%. So fewer teens, our key gaming audience here in the United States. That's why we're stepping back and saying more of the same is not going to drive this industry. That's why we're stepping back and saying we have to disrupt the marketplace that we helped create 20 years ago in order to be successful moving forward.